Could you give us an overview of the situation of the Roman Empire and the Roman city at the time that Gregory was coming of age?
Sure. I think the biggest misconception that most of us have, living as we do in a period that frames the Roman world the way it does, is we assume that the Roman Empire fell. Often the date is 476, which is when the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed. Um, but that would have been news to anybody at the time. Nobody at the time. The Western Empire was certainly in complete disarray, completely crumbling all over the place. But the Eastern Empire, which was the Roman Empire, and Constantinople had been the capital since, I think, I forget what year it was that Constantine built it, but it had been for a long time, and this is the
Yeah.
Roman world. But what had been happening in the 2 centuries that preceded Gregory's life is just that, especially the western part of the empire was just under constant, just constant turmoil that were coming
This
from,
is in the 500s, right?
yeah, the 4 and the 500s really. So the first sacking of Rome, which was the first sack of Rome in 800 years. So remember, the city had been unconquered for almost a millennium at this point. Was Alaric and the Goths that sacked the city. And after that, the city got sacked. I forget how many times. It was just several times. I mean, every couple of decades, the city was getting sacked. And each time, the city and the surrounding countryside was damaged to a degree that it could no longer sustain the population that it had before. So by the time Gregory was living there, so Rome at its height, I think in the middle imperial period, had something like over 1 million residents, which was gigantic for an ancient city. Um, Rome at the time of Gregory was much, much diminished. It was much smaller, both in size, in population, and in its importance. Um, even in terms of political importance, Rome was less important in the Western world than Ravenna was. Ravenna actually has access to the Adriatic Sea, and so it's much easier to communicate with Constantinople. But Rome had very strong symbolic importance, both historic and its Christian importance, because that was the city of Peter and Paul. That was why for the Christian church, Rome was seen as just very important. That was where the bodies of Paul and Peter were buried, where they were martyred, and so it had a huge importance there. Also because of the papacy, but as you would know, having read the book, that the papacy, while it was important, didn't take on the major role in public life, in the political life of the church and of the civilized world that it would later after Gregory. Gregory is probably um, the most important figure in that whole span in terms of turning the papacy into what we know it to be today, in terms of the role that it played internationally. And so, yeah, but just back to your question of what the world he was living in was like, Rome was very, very diminished. There's a couple of scenes in the book that describe the palaces on the Palatine Hill, and the Circus Maximus and all that stuff were basically all in ruins already by the time Gregory was a man, by the time he was grown up. At the same time, Rome was still part of the empire. There was a war going on throughout all of Gregory's childhood called the Gothic Wars, where basically the Byzantines and the Goths kept fighting over Rome and other cities and areas in Italy. By the time Gregory was an adult, Rome was back under imperial control. And so he gets the job of city prefect, where he actually was the secular administrator of the city during his time as a young man. So as the story opens, as the story of his life opens, his childhood, they had gone through this whole like really, really horrible wars between the Byzantines and the Goths. And there wasn't much love for either side among the people of Rome. They saw themselves as Romans, but they sure did not have much of a love and an allegiance to the emperor way off in Constantinople. And so, yeah, that's kind of the stage that's set for Gregory's life, basically.